We're recording. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Coastal Environmental Educators Network and to North Carolina 4-H for our program today on coastal ecology. I'm Angela Brisson, one of the camping specialists for North Carolina 4-H camps. And I'm joined today by Jonathan Peoples, or JP. He is our presenter and our program director from the Eastern 4-H Center. And he will be presenting and teaching today on coastal ecology. Please note that today's session is being recorded and we're thrilled to have you all join us today. This is presented as the first starting program for both North Carolina 4-H Nature Adventures and Field Trip Fridays in partnership with the Eastern 4-H Center and the Coastal Environmental Education Network. Today, we're going to be learning about the Albemarle Sound and the amazing biodiversity of life that calls it home at the Eastern 4-H Center. This program is provided in part by the North Carolina 4-H program camping program, as part of North Carolina State University and North Carolina Cooperative Extension. Our 4-H camping program includes 3 centers, which you can see at the locations on the screen. We run fall and spring school programming and field trips at these centers, as well as operate a traditional summer camping program from June through August every single year. So you can see we have the Eastern Center up in northeastern North Carolina at the coast. That's where we're going to be field tripping to today. We also have the Betsy Jeff Penn 4-H Center, which is just north of Greensboro, and then Millstone 4-H Camp, which is down in the Sandhills of North Carolina, just east of Charlotte. All right. If you'd like to learn more about our 4-H camps, you can go to www.nc4hcamps.org. And don't forget, if you haven't already, download the learning and discussion guide for this program today. This is a worksheet for you to follow along with during the session. And you can download that guide at our website, which we're going to put the link in the chat window. So now I'm going to turn it over to JP, our program director from the Eastern 4-H Center, to teach us all about the coastal ecology of the Albemarle Sound.
All right, guys, welcome to today's session. Thanks, Angela, for the introduction there. As she said, Jonathan Peoples, or formerly JP. I'm the program director here at the Eastern 4-H Center. And today we're going to essentially go on like a virtual boardwalk tour. We have some pre-recorded videos that we'll go through, and then we'll jump back and forth and show you that we recorded previously. But some things will be right here kind of showing you right off our boardwalk, So we're going to start out with a little bit of just what is a wetland. Essentially, it's a distinct ecosystem that is flooded by water either permanently or seasonally, where different plants and animals thrive. So it's, it's a very broad term, and we'll get into some other definitions of what wetlands are and what kind of types of wetlands we have, or what type of wetland we have here at the Eastern 4-H Center here shortly. Up next, we do have a little bit of a drone video, kind of a flyover, to show you our camp and to show you kind of where we are and what our wetland looks like.
Thanks, JP. So folks, I am going to share my screen to share this video, and if you'll give me just a second to pull it up.
Alrighty, guys, so coming to you here today with a drone video, a little bit of a flyover of camp, and we're talking about the varying types of forest and aquatic plant life that we have here. So up front, you can see the cypress knees coming out of the shore there. You see those 2 big cypress trees there with their white bark, kind of really tall, standing, very strong looking, and we talk about their root structure in a different video. As you move a little bit further in, you see you pick up a few more pine trees. And those, as well as some other dead standing trees you see here, are very good for homes for woodpeckers, nesting sites for birds of prey like bald eagles and osprey and things like that. This little low area is what is typically called a Pocosin forest. It's very shrubbery looking, looks a little underdeveloped based upon the rest of the area, but that's about how it should be. As you get towards the back of camp, you get a mixture of trees. You kind of lose the cypress trees because it's more land-based here. You don't have like that boggy, waterlogged wetland area. This is more like typically an inland setup with red oaks, white oaks, beech, birch, elm, sweet gum, things like that that have taken over, maples as well in there. Predominantly still, you're going to see a lot of pine trees. So that's a view of camp, and this is actually at the back of camp. You get to see the rec hall, the Cope Center, and the water tower in the distance.
And as you notice, we also have an American Sign Language interpreter for all of our pre-recorded videos today. That young man's name is Reed Barnes, and he's one of our partners with the Sertoma Civic Club, whom we partner with every summer to provide a camp for deaf and hard of hearing children. So you will see Reed in all of our pre-recorded videos today doing American Sign Language. And JP, I'll give it back to you.
Very cool. Thanks, Angela. So that was a view of our wetland. This is a little bit more closer view of what our type of wetland is. So it's called a Pocosin forest, a little bit of a different term there for you. So it's a naturally occurring freshwater evergreen shrub bog or wetlands of the southeastern coastal plain. Not just right here, they occur in the southeastern region of the United States. And if you translate that term, it literally means swamp on a hill. So a little bit of an oxymoron, but that's kind of what it is. It's a floating, kind of marshy, forested and bushy shrub bog. It's above the waterline, just barely though. There's not a lot of real actual land here. It's very soft and those sorts of things. But you do get trees that can go down through this and root themselves in there. All righty. Next up, we'll talk about kind of the function of wetlands. It's very twofold. You'll see here a picture of this one of our areas here on camp, and we can kind of talk about it. So you see how the water's a little darker, but you still have all this aquatic plant life, and you have all these things sticking out of the water. What's going on here? Essentially, they are twofold in that they are filtered. So when we have all of our fresh water that comes through our rivers, we as society unfortunately put pollutants into them, oils, stuff like that, sediment even gets trapped in our wetland areas and doesn't make it to some of our drinking water sources. So that's why you have this kind of almost, some would say, nasty environment. It's some parts of it are clean, but it can be a little bit kind of dingy water. The other thing is that it's a little bit of a sponge in the fact that it can soak up a lot of water during flooding events or in times of heavy rainfall, or say we have a tropical system or a hurricane show up, then essentially this is a good time for it to soak up the water. On the contrary, if it's very dry and it has water in its reserves, these plants and plants around here do, then it can survive a lot longer during a drought than, say, an open field of grass or something like that. Alrighty. And then next up, we're going to talk about an ecosystem. So earlier we were over here looking right up this creek. This is called Deep Creek. It's a very misnamed creek. It's pretty shallow, actually. But what we'll talk about is what exactly is an ecosystem. And this is essentially a short definition, and we'll go into a little bit, but a biological community of interacting organisms and their physical environment. So if you think about your community where you live, whether it's in downtown of a big city and you have tons of people and things and businesses and lights and all that, or is your community out the farm where you have acres and acres of no neighbors, there's two different types of communities. You have different types of ecosystems, and those communities rely on each other for roads, for infrastructure, for water, for your neighbor who might help you out with your yard sometimes, and that's kind of how an ecosystem in the natural world works as well. You have say creeks and streams and trees and roots and animals that depend upon each other to interact with each other to survive. So it's a very cool little setup there, and that's an ecosystem. Next up, we're going to go over flora and fauna and the amount of diversity that we have here in these areas. As you saw in the previous picture, and you might have noticed in the video as well, there's tons of little shrubbery things. There's just tons of areas for things to sort of hide. So it's a great habitat for creating a diverse ecosystem here. So if you think about flora and fauna, there's maybe new terms for you. Flora is plants, and I always try to remember that as floral sounds like floral a little bit, kind of like a flower. And fauna, although it's spelled different, is animals. I try to think of it as like a fawn, which is a baby deer, and that's how I always remembered it growing up and stuff like that. But essentially, these coastal ecosystems create a unique habitat, and sometimes things can only live in this area because there's such precise conditions mixed with temperatures and water levels and those sorts of things. So we're going to start off with a flora, which is a cypress tree. And Angela, I believe, does have a video that we pre-recorded on this as well.
Yep, and if you folks will give me just a second here to pull up that video. Here we go.
Alrighty guys, JP coming to you from our ecosystem here, and what we're going to talk about now is how these bald cypress trees have adapted to their environment, to this coastal, kind of murky, saturated ecosystem that we are in. What I'm looking at here is these bald cypress knees, and they're very hard, and they kind of look like your knee sticking out of the water here. What these are is a way to stabilize the tree, and see how sturdy they are. All this other stuff is very loose, and you can move it around. These are all dead limbs and stuff like that. But these are rooted into the ground, and they're connected to this bald cypress tree that's approximately 15 or 20 foot behind us here. Another very cool feature of the bald cypress tree is that it's very good for lumber. It's something that's been harvested in the past very heavily. It grows fairly quickly, but it also grows very, very straight. So even up to about 30 foot up, it's very straight. There's not many main limbs to create many knots in the lumber and stuff like that. And also at the top where you see all these branches going out, they're pretty big branches. They fan out very, very wide, and they're a good spot for birds of prey to act as birds of prey and prey upon things below in the forest here. Or they also use it as like a nesting site. You'll often see them super exposed, and sometimes maybe in a dead one that's kind of super exposed, and they can see all angles around them. It's kind of like their fort and way of living up there. So that's our take on the bald cypress tree and how it's adapted to the coastal waters here. Alrighty, back out here to it. So that was a kind of an overview of cypress trees and kind of how they live. I talked briefly about their root structure, those knees sticking out of the ground, and they're actually pretty far away from where the main bulk of the tree is. So if you have a big wind system and it's blowing you around on the coast out here, they're super exposed. There's nothing to stop lots of wind interacting with these trees. And so their root structures have adapted and gone far out and wide and shoot up these little nodules that root into the ground. And it creates more of a stable environment for the tree to live in. And that's kind of how they have adapted to live as such tall and heavy trees. You look at them, they just don't look like they should survive, 50-mile-per-hour winds, which we quite often get here with the nor'easter events that we're having right now, or either with, sort of. All right, next up, we'll go and check out macro invertebrates in our Wetlands Boardwalk.
All right, folks, so give me just a second here to get our macro invertebrate video up, and we're going back out to the boardwalk here with JP.
So I just want to come out to you guys here from the Wetland Boardwalk and kind of show you around out here and kind of explain where we are and what the ecosystem is here. If you hear out there the waves crashing kind of on our shoreline, that's part of our estuary. And an estuary is where freshwater from rivers meet the saltwater from the oceans. So you have like an inlet out on the Outer Banks, and you have a freshwater river that's really full right now with all the rainwater we've had. And they kind of mix in salinity. Salinity is how much salt's in the water, and basically you end up with sort of like brackish water is what it's called. And it's very, very low salt content in the water, like less than 5% of the water here is salt. So freshwater plants and animals are still allowed to live, but it creates a very diverse environment where you can get other things that do like salt water that live in the area. And so, did you see here, this is kind of like murky. Most people would say this is a swamp. A lot of swamps aren't saltwater and infused like that. And so it's a very kind of interesting environment where lots and lots of things live. And what we're going to do here in a little bit is basically go out and kind of explore their environment, be respectful, and see what we find. So what we're going to do is almost any area out here, you could basically dip in and probably find something. But I'm going to try to get the most use out of this net and try to get a lot of good stuff out here. Kind of dig down. Again, you're not thrashing about. You're just kind of pulling up some stuff. Get a little of the water out. And then we're going to look in here and see what all we got. Looks like this nasty, gooey stuff, and it probably smells like that, right?
One trick to this is that if you sit here for a while, these things are basically meant to hide. They're designed, they're adapted to hide in what I've put in this bucket. So some things will just start moving around on their own. They'll kind of, there's a little beetle thing there. But then some of it you're going to have to like dig for. You're going to have to really kind of be patient with it and look around. And this is if like you tried in your backyard, in your local park. You don't have to be in a Wetlands Boardwalk in this specific spot to find these things. You can totally look around and those sorts of things. So what we'll do is we'll continue to look around and we'll see what we can find in here. So I dipped out what looks like to be just a bunch of muck and a bunch of this kind of trashy, kind of, you know, organic matter, as it were. But if you dump it in, you'll see out pops this guy. And he's a dragonfly nymph. And when he starts moving around and those sorts of things, you'll see him kind of shoot water out the backside. He's like a little jet ski moving around. It's pretty cool. So in a couple weeks or however long it takes him, you know, he'll become a dragonfly, and you'll see those out there. This other guy over here is a water bug that we pulled out. And this is a separate bucket, so we're cleaning the water up so you can see what's going on. And after doing a little looking around, this guy actually has eggs on his back, and it's the male's job to basically carry these eggs for a set period of time. So he gets Dad of the Year award right there. Let's see what else we can find. All right, so let's go for a second scoop here, guys. See what we got. Oh, there's a bunch of movement right here. What is that? Whew. I think we have a crayfish. He does not want to be caught. There he goes. Look at him. So this is actually a pretty cool find, a pretty big guy. We see some of the little small ones that are, yeah, everything in this bucket's all of a sudden afraid of him because he's a little bit of a predator. So this little water bug's like, yep, nope, don't want any part of that. But it's a pretty cool thing. A lot of people use these in the fish industry as food. So they can go out and catch these. And I think it's actually like the state invertebrate of Louisiana. So you ever heard of like a low country boil? These guys are often used for that. This guy's lucky. We're going to put him back. And a really important message about all what we're doing today is to make sure that you're putting them back approximately where you found them. You don't want to remove these and carry them to your Aunt Nana next door and drop them in her pond, because then you're just spreading. He doesn't belong there. He doesn't live there. And also, besides that, if you go out and try this, and yeah, one second. If you go out and try this, make sure you have an adult with you. Make sure you have a caregiver with you. Someone that's going to be here in case, say, I fall, you know, stuff like that. So I think that's it for us today. We found a few cool things, and other than that, take care and y'all have fun out there.
Okay, and then we have one more pre-recorded video here about the flora and fauna in the Albemarle Sound and coastal ecology here at the Eastern 4-H Center, and that's about blue crabs. So I'm going to go ahead and share that video as well.
All righty.
Give me just a second to pull that up. Here we go.
Hey guys, welcome back out to the estuary where we are out here, and kind of give you a few more land pointers here. So that is pointed west, and so this is where the Roanoke River comes in and feeds into this area, which is the Albemarle Sound. And then to your east, can't really see it, but around the corner about 50-60 miles, it's the Outer Banks, Manio, things like that. And that's where the salt water comes in and mixes into this big area. Now you may look at it and say, man, that looks a lot like the ocean. It's big, open, wide water. It's really not that deep. It is a bit brackish water like we talked about before, but it's not that salty. It's not like the ocean. You don't have those oceanic animals and fish and stuff like that here. But what you do have is Chesapeake blue crabs, and they are definitely a pretty cool thing to catch, and they're easily caught on doing a couple different methods. If you're like a commercial fisherman, you have what's known as a crab pot, and I can grab one and show you those in here in a minute. But basically, you just have a feeder, and they go into it, and they're kind of caught, go out there the next day, hopefully pull enough out there for you to be profitable and those sorts of things. If you're doing it more independently, if you have someone with you want to go out and try this, You again need to be in kind of the right area on the coastal region, on the South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia coast to do this. But they're there, especially if it's the right time of the year. Right now, May is like the beginning of their season through about November when you want to try to catch these. And like I said before, they are opportunists, so they're not very picky. If they see it and it looks and smells and tastes like food, they're probably going to try it out. So typically, a lot of fishermen use things that they're not going to go out there and put a T-bone steak on it because that costs a lot. But what they will do is they'll use like the lesser quality meats that we don't use. We don't typically use in dining institutions and things like that. They'll pull out hearts and livers and those sorts of things, and that's what we have today. So this is pretty simple. It's just a stick. It's almost like you'd be flying a kite, except you got a weighted kind of pincher down here, and you would take part of this and kind of stab it through there. Stab it through there. There it is. They're pretty tough, and the reason you do this, you can use shrimp, but shrimp is very fleshy and very soft, and the crabs will just tear it off and run off with it, swim off with it. And so what you do with this is very muscular and it's got a lot of tendons and stuff in it. So they really kind of pinch onto it, and then you just drop it down. Now the water here, and even further out, is only like 3 to 5 foot deep. So you don't need a lot of depth to really do this here. If you were elsewhere and it was deeper, this method would be a little bit more difficult, and you would have a crab pot with a buoy. And then, patience is the virtue here. So if you're sitting here and it's just like fishing out in the pond, you kind of leave a little slack, like I can feel it hit the bottom, then I pull it up just a little bit, and that's where the crabs are on their bottom feeders typically. They're not spending energy swimming around. They're going to be up just above the surface of the sound here. And then you'll feel a pull. Hopefully you have a net nearby, and you can take it up and check it if you want, and drop it right back down. Now obviously, the more of these you have in the water, the more people you have holding and feeling and stuff, the better the odds of you catching a blue crab. But that's how you do it. And that's how we do it here at the Eastern 4-H Center and have for about 20 years now. And it's something that if you want to get into, again, you have to be in the right area. Make sure you're doing it safely. Make sure you have the permission to fish in that area and those sorts of things. And you should be good. Alrighty guys, so what we have here is a Chesapeake blue crab, named for, you can see some of his pinchers and stuff have that blue coloring on them. Chesapeake, Virginia, of course, but we're all across the Atlantic seaboard you can catch these. They're commercially fished, and they're actually very tasty. This is a male, which is called a Jimmy, and he has this little carapace, underneath the bottom of his carapace, he has this little pointy section, which is his apron. A female would have a very wide, almost like a pyramid-shaped apron there. These little back pieces here are his little paddlers, and that's what he uses to swim around, capture things like that. And typically he's only, there he goes, showing off a little bit. He's only going to be going after things that are dead, decomposing, things that are easy to grab, and they are opportunists. They will eat almost anything. We caught him today with chicken gizzards. But in the front, what he uses is these two pinchers, these two claws, and they hurt pretty good, so we're kind of holding him in a particular way, which is with his arm back here that's connected to his main body or his carapace. You see his two eyes up front, big googly eyes, antennas. He has all sorts of sensors to tell what's going on. And primarily these things move side to side. They don't really go forward like you would think forward. They kind of scurry like crabs do. And that sort of thing. So this is the male, showed you that. But that's the Chesapeake blue crab.
All right, and back to you, JP.
All right, thank you, Angela. Got a lot of videos going on over there. Next up, we're going to talk about a little bit of an interesting plant that has adapted to the waters here and the environment, but also like the quality of the water. And gets and consuming animals. You see here you have the Venus flytrap, you have the pitcher plant, and you have the sundew. I was almost about to forget the name of that one, but it's a sundew. And basically these three are kind of the genres or types and categories of carnivorous plants. There's different ones within the 600 different species of carnivorous plants around the world. We don't have that many in North Carolina. I'm not sure the exact number, how many we have in the state of North Carolina, but the Venus flytrap, essentially, it traps flies. You see right here, it has this little it closes it up, and all these little, kind of teeth-looking things kind of interlocked and trap the fly in there. Because there's these enzymes that have been, created by the plant over time to, essentially break down the animal or whatever it's trapped. So if it falls in there, it's going to close up because it feels it. It has these little sensory fibers that it feels it. And the same with the sundew. It feels something hit it, it'll close up on it or clamp down on it. And if it can digest it, it will. If it can't, it'll open back up, stick will fall out, get washed out by rain, however. And that's kind of how those two are set up. The pitcher plant's a little bit different in the fact that it attracts pollinators with the underside of this kind of canopy, and you have this purplish kind of reddish color in here. That's particularly for this one. Some of them are yellow. Some of them are actually a more vibrant green that attracts different types of bugs. And so what happens is this is a very slippery slope right here, and they fall down into this base, and then the bottom of this, the same enzymes or a very similar compound that breaks down what are called a very unfortunate time when you come to eat at this flower, unless you know what you're doing. All righty. And next up, we have a discussion about black bears. We do have tons and tons of black bears in this part of the state. It's known as the black bear capital of the world, not only because of how many we have, but because of how large they get. When you think of black bears, most people think about, mountainous regions of the state or something like that. And, that's true. They do have them out there in the western part of the state, but they get a lot bigger. They're a lot more prevalent. There's a lot more of them. So you have to be a little bit more careful about, leaving garbage out and things like that. Bears here can get up to 800 pounds. That is a small car. So they can get quite large. And they typically, you never say never, but they're typically afraid of humans. Unless you're messing with their cubs or something like that, they're typically going to run off and want nothing to do with you. If you were to come up with one, making lots of noise, making yourself look larger than you are, holding your hands above your back or a book bag with you holding above you, typically they're going to run away. They're just as afraid of you, if not more, than we are of them. So that's kind of our take on black bears. And you can look up stuff down here, and there's festivals and all sorts of things surrounding black bears in eastern North Carolina.
Thanks, JP. We've got a lot of good questions
Awesome.
to ask about all of the stuff that you have presented so far. So I'll start with the carnivorous plants. We got a lot of questions about the carnivorous plants. So
Sure.
A really good question here. Do carnivorous plants produce air?
They do. They still go through the transpiration process. They still, not all of their energy comes through these insects or bugs that they can trap and sort of thing. So they still do photosynthesis, and they still are just like other plants in that, they take in CO2 and put out oxygen and those sorts of things. So it's a great question, though. Very, very inquisitive.
Yeah, that was a great question. Really smart. And do the carnivorous plants, can they hurt us? Can they hurt humans?
They cannot. They're not like pinchers. They're not like bear traps. They're not going to like. They look sort of sharp, but they're pretty soft. They're just enough to catch a fly. But if you stuck your finger in one, which don't do that if you find one, it's not good for the plant. But you can easily pull your finger out. They're not going to walk around and trap you or anything like that. I would imagine that there may be some species that are poisonous to consume, so I wouldn't go and eat one. But as far as them attacking us, very little threat.
Awesome, thank you. And JP, do you know how many species of carnivorous plants there are?
There's quite a few. I could actually look up and see real quick. I think there's around 1,000 or so. I looked at that before. There's a whole lot. If I could spell correctly. Carnivorous. Yeah, so it looks like around 1,000 or so, something like that. Some conflicting reports, so we should do some research when you see conflicting reports on what you're discovering. But I would say probably less than 1,000, considering what I'm looking at. But that's a lot, and most of those are worldwide. They don't just live in southeastern North Carolina or the southeast. There is a pretty diverse pocket of them in the southeastern region of North Carolina, and it's kind of known regionally as where the Venus flytrap lives. And it's the most reactive of all the, all carnivorous plants. So you see a lot of, people on them and take pictures or videos of them reacting to the flies and such.
Very cool. And yeah, Venus flytraps, I think, are probably the most well-known carnivorous plants. And they are very specifically native to this part of North Carolina that we have been exploring this morning. Okay, a few other great questions. We've got some questions about the crabs. So why are crabs blue?
Okay, great question. So they're the Chesapeake blue crab. That's their name, and they're named for their blue coloration. Now, throughout their life, and whether they're male and female, they're sometimes a little bit more blue or a little bit less blue. So the more blue they are, the more adult they are. They're bigger, of course, as well. But this is an indicator of that they're mature crab. Also, you will sometimes see a blue crab that has red tips on its pinchers, and those are the females. And so this is another indicator that, to the male, that's a female, or a sook, or to a jimmy, which is a male. And so it's a little bit of an indication, but it's a chemical reaction based upon their age and sexual orientation there.
Great. And why do the crabs eat dead things?
They're opportunists, so they want to go out and take advantage of what's easy to grab. So if there's something on the bottom that's decaying and just not going to attack them or not going to run away from them, then that's a lot easier to eat. So simply they're an opportunist.
Wonderful. And JP, we did have a question about brackish water. If you could explain what that is again.
Sure. So it's a little bit of a different term. It's a kind of a cool term. I've always liked this word brackish. You can try it out there if you want to. But it's basically where the fresh water comes and meets the salt water of an ocean or a salty body of water. So for us here, we have the Chowan and Roanoke River meeting the Atlantic Ocean via inlets out there at Oregon Inlet on the Outer Banks. And so you have this mixture of water, and they kind of mix together, and it creates this low salinity environment. So the water is not purely fresh water; it has some saltwater intrusion in it.
Excellent. And then this is a really great question about that as well. Do sharks live in the Sound? Can they live in the brackish water of the Sound?
They can. They can live in the Sound. I will add that there's not many species of sharks that can do that, but there are some. The most notable one is the bull shark, and notable because of its size and some of his behaviors and stuff like that. So. But yeah, that is one for sure that can, and they're more likely to be in a higher salinity brackish water environment. So if you're closer to the Oregon Inlet out near like the Croatan Sound, is where you're going to see, or more likely see, those types of species. Sometimes you will get other species that will come in and just check it out and venture around and be like, I don't know, it's a little too fresh water for me, and they're back out to sea. So there again, with never say never. You could see sharks well inland, but typically speaking, they're going to be out in the ocean or very close to those inlets where it's a little bit higher salinity of brackish water. Great question, though.
Yeah, that's a really good question. You guys are thinkers. Last question here, a couple of questions. One, have you ever seen a black bear at the Eastern 4-H Center yourself? And do bears eat humans?
Oof. Great questions. So for the first one, absolutely. We have bear neighbors. We've done everything but named them. We kind of treat them as pets, when you ride around. And I live on camp, so I see them all the time. The picture of the bird feeder and the black bear slides previously was my bird feeder. I had to end up taking it up. That was the spring, when everything hit and they wanted entertainment. I got entertainment. But as far as bears eating humans, that is very, very untrue as far as black bears go. Brown bears are a little bit different. Brown bears or grizzly bears don't live here in the eastern part of the United States. They live in northern and western territories and states. And so you have those that can. So bears can be very, very territorial and very, very aggressive. Black bears, generally speaking, are not. They would need a lot of reasons to come and attack a human, pretty much.
Yeah, they're definitely pretty skittish, the black bears are when it comes to humans, unless of course they have, I think JP, you said this earlier, unless they have a cub or a couple of cubs with them, they might be a little bit more aggressive then, but even then, most likely they're just going to run away from you if they see you.
Yeah, if you put them in a situation where they need to be defensive, it's a whole different ballgame. If you interact with them in a way that's not healthy to them or something they don't want, then they're going to offend their young or themselves. So keep that in mind.
That is great. JP, thank you so much. Really good questions from our audience here. And a few things before we wrap up. Thank you again to everyone for joining us, and to JP, our presenter today. We had a lot of fun learning about coastal ecology with you. Please do check out our Nature Adventures program schedule for the remainder of the fall semester. We're going to be doing sessions like this every 2 weeks on different ecology and natural science topics throughout the fall semester. So definitely be sure to check that out. And then also check out the amazing programs available from the Coastal Environmental Education Network's Fall Field Trip Fridays. So Field Trip Fridays are provided by organizations up and down the coast of North Carolina on a range of coastal environmental topics. So if this session was of particular interest to you and you want to dive a little bit deeper, you may check out the Coastal Environmental Education Network's Fall Field Trip Fridays. Nature Adventures is the virtual learning program that we as North Carolina 4-H are hosting this fall, and both programs are going to be recorded, and you can register for the recorded version if your schedule doesn't allow you to join us for the live programs. If you're interested in learning more about North Carolina 4-H or joining your local county 4-H program, we're going to stick a URL in the chat window where you can look up the contact information for your local 4-H office. Every county in North Carolina has a 4-H agent, and that's who you want to look up. You want to get in touch with that 4-H agent for your county if you're here in the state. If you're in another state across the US, 4-H is a U.S. national youth development organization. And so you can do the same thing. Just go to Google your state's 4-H program, and you'll be able to look up your agent for your county and see what kind of programs they have locally. Also, be sure to check out our website for all of the details about Nature Adventures, including North Carolina Standard Course of Study Teaching Standards Alignment. We also have learning and discussion guides for each program and supplemental learning materials for some of them. So all of those are available at the Nature Adventures URL, which is again in the chat window. Our next Nature Adventures program is going to be Beaver Pond Explorations on October 1st at 9 a.m. That's going to be hosted by our Betsy Jeff Penn 4-H Center. They have a beaver pond habitat that's been there for about 40 years or so. So it's really mature. It's really cool. You'll get to see a few beavers and what they do out at the beaver pond there at BJP. And again, that's going to be on October 1st at 9 a.m. You can still register for that event through Eventbrite, and we'll give you that URL as well. Thanks again so much to everyone for joining us and for your time. We hope you've had fun. We hope you've learned a little bit about North Carolina coastal ecology. Thanks again to JP and our Eastern 4-H Center for hosting this session, and we'll see you next time. Thanks so much.